So listen, you have had quite an interesting journey of life and
That's
faith.
right. But
So if you don't mind, tell us what you're comfortable sharing with myself and who will listen to us. How did you
oh,
get to this
absolutely.
point in your life?
Well, it's a winding path, and I will do my best to keep it brief, and then you can drill into any
Hmm.
interesting details that you would like to get into. But essentially, the main beats of the story. I grew up a like Catholic homeschooled kid. My dad is a well-known theologian. Goes by the moniker Doctor Italy, but Dr. Marcellino D'Ambrosio, author, speaker, does pilgrimages. And taught at the University of Dallas. And so my family moved down there as a homeschooled kid, very intellectually astute, very well read, very well formed. I went to seminary, and when I was in seminary after high school, I really fell in love with evangelization and the mission of the laity to be the leaven of the world. And I left seminary with this like great missionary instinct to build a family, to convert the world through new media, the through youth ministry. I was a speaker, as a musician, and I went out and began to build one of the biggest youth ministries in the U.S. In Frisco, Texas. But while I was doing that, I fell deeply in love, and then just on the edge of engagement, became very ill, and nobody could figure out what was going on. One of the most infuriating and difficult of the symptoms that I was experiencing was chronic insomnia, and chronic insomnia such that it was like totally debilitating. 20 minutes to 2 hours a night type thing over and over and over and over and over again. And in the midst of that, I knew that I couldn't move forward into marriage with this person that I love very dearly. And so I had to end the relationship after a while of this, and in a search of a solution, hoping that perhaps I could get back to it. But it took years and years and years to begin to diagnose it and get to the bottom of what it was. And in the midst of that, the relationship had to really truly die. She got married to somebody else, and I, in the grief and the anger and sort of just the insanity of sleep deprivation, I really lost my faith. And that wasn't something that I chose. It was something that in many ways just happened to me. I could not believe in God. I could not believe in God's goodness. And frankly, I became one of those atheists that just really wanted to tear down the faith of everyone around me, because I found it to be so infuriating. And I, in the, I guess during that time, I found myself doing writing projects as a way to make, yeah, just to survive. That was the profession that I could do while I was in such a state. And so one of the projects that I was working on was a Catholic entrepreneur that had dedicated I guess his practice to Saint Maximilian Kolbe. And I was writing a biography for Maximilian Kolbe for the website, found the page, Maximilian Kolbe's page on Wikipedia, and just was shocked by some details in it that I'd never heard before. Many people already know that he traded his life for another man and saved another man's life, and starved to death in a starvation bunker for him. I think that some of the details of the story that began to magnetize it for me were that not only did he stay alive for 14 days, but over time, those who were in the cell began to sing these songs with him, began to pray with him. They were often found holding each other in the middle of the cell, singing these hymns. And from my perspective, in the state that I was in of grief and suffering, and perhaps the experience of insomnia gave me a reference point for starvation because I was starving so much for sleep. I I realized how miraculous that was. That there was no way that I could imagine Saint Maximilian Kolbe getting me to sing in the midst of something that dark and traumatic and evil. And I think it was one of those things that most people just sort of take for granted that he was able to do that. Of course, that's what they would do. But truly, from the perspective of the human heart and the human journey, I guess that is a miracle to be able to instill that sort of hope and heroism. And ultimately, he was not only was he executed 14 days later with no food or water, because these songs, of course, were being so annoying to the German, I guess, effort. But there were four other men that were also executed with him. And that means that he brought these four other men to a point of sanctity with him, that he basically like took them by the hand and brought him all the way to the doorway of heaven. And I believe even into heaven with him. And so that perspective, those details shocked me. They made me realize that Kolbe had something to teach me about hope, about suffering, about how to endure, even though I was in many ways incredibly resistant to opening my heart to that. It just haunted me, as saints often do. And I guess here I am 6 years later, with a movie about him being produced and my faith restored and a healed heart. And in many ways, I have all of that. I owe all of that to this sort of ongoing meditation that has produced this film.
What a remarkable story, and a remarkable testimony to the power of the saints and their intercession. In this case, Maximilian Kolbe, for yourself. You have written and directed the film, both.
That's right. That's right. I wrote the film really in these bouts of insomnia, when I couldn't do anything else in the middle of the night and there's no one to talk to. I used the script writing process to talk to Maximilian Kolbe, and in many ways it felt like I was being invited into the cell, and in many ways it also felt like Kolbe was being invited into my sort of the cell of my insomnia and the cell of my
Right,
suffering. And
right,
we were meeting there, and the dialogue that was taking place was ultimately the foundation of the script that became
right,
the movie.
right. You know, the story, of course, many of us know about Maximilian Kolbe singing in his cell because it mimics the ancient martyrs of the church, right, who sang on their way to crucifixion. I did not know what you just shared, which I thought was fascinating, that he also brought others to sing with him. And correct me now, because I may be wrong here, but most of his cellmates would have been Jewish.
It was so at the time, and this is one of those little known facts about Auschwitz's history, that the Polish people are very that they really want told, which is that before Auschwitz became the main instrument of the Holocaust, it started as a internment camp to exterminate Polish resistance and Polish identity. And so there were Jewish people in Auschwitz, for sure, but it was at the time specifically for people who were of influence, who had some kind of leadership role in Poland. And of course, there were Jewish people, but there were simply POWs. There were people who were involved in
Hmm.
the army. There were people involved in media and politics and culture. Those who were wealthy and were deemed to be perhaps a thorn in the flesh for the Nazi government. These were the people that were mainly present in Auschwitz at the time. There were also people, homosexuals, that were shipped off from Berlin to be there. And so there was this confluence of different personalities from far-reaching opposite aisles. If you were to just sort of take a cross section of Washington, D.C., and take the average of all of those people and then put them in Auschwitz, that's kind of a good example of what that might have looked like, or
Well,
Los Angeles or something like that.
right.
Like
Or New
these,
York, for that matter.
right? Yeah, these places that are
Right,
sort of the cultural hubs
right.
of the city. That's what you
Hmm.
would have expected. And so, of course, it's a story about ecumenism, and that there was
Yeah.
people not in his like from his religious faith tradition, and that's depicted in the movie.
Oh, it is.
But there are also people who are perhaps from his faith tradition, but from across the political spectrum, as well. So there's a lot of really interesting dynamics, and
Hmm.
we really played those out to the nth degree in the film.
That's tremendous, tremendous. I do know that some of the influencers, a group of influencers the Nazis certainly wanted to exterminate, is the clergy itself, is the Catholic
Right.
Church's clergy, because
Mhm.
of the great fidelity of the peoples, particularly in the Eastern Europe, right, to
Right.
Christ through their clergy. Um,
Especially in Poland. Yeah.
yeah, especially in Poland. But it's fascinating though. So we don't know the religious background of the men who sang with him, and so it could have crossed faith lines, if I could put it that way. Which then, if I could speculate that, then it shows the power of hope and how hope can bridge the gap between people. It's an answer to one of the deepest longings of our hearts, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that the experience of suffering is universal. It's one of the most universal things
Hmm.
about the human experience. Every human has to face their own death and ultimately the deaths of those that are close to them at some point in their life. You know, some people experience great griefs and loss earlier on in their lives. Some people experience it later on in their lives. But either way, it's an inevitability. And I think that the beautiful thing about Maximilian Kolbe's story is that it's able to speak to that universal experience and give an answer to it in a way that our current culture does not. Um, you know, there's lots of things to say about like the culture wars themselves, but all of that I think is a symptom of an underlying lack of hope. If if this world is all that we have, it create, and that's what people believe, then it creates all of these incredibly uh difficult scenarios in which you have to sort of backbend around suffering, that suffering can't be accepted because it really does make this life feel meaningless if
Hmm.
there is nothing beyond this life and
Hmm.
beyond the suffering to sort of stretch for and reach
Hmm.
for when you're in the midst of that darkness. And
Hmm.
so Colby's story and his songs and his witness of hope in the midst of the darkest and most terrifying experience of death and oppression that perhaps humans could exact upon each other since the crucifixion. I think it is an absolute miracle and an absolute, I guess, clarion call of hope for the world.
Thanks for watching. Before you go, please be sure to subscribe, like, hit the bell, leave a comment down below. All of that stuff helps us reach more souls.